Man Who Never Slept. Alex's Descent into Darkness. I don't usually post things like this, but I feel like I have to get it out there. Something's been eating at me for years, and I haven't been able to shake it. I'm not looking for closure anymore. I know I'll never get that. But maybe someone out there will recognize this story, or maybe someone else has experienced something similar. If that's you, I need you to understand it's real. I'm talking about my friend Alex. In 2014, he disappeared, just like that. One day he was here. The next, gone without a trace. And the worst part is that it all started with a dream. I remember it like it was yesterday. Alex and I had been friends for years. We met back in college, both majoring in psychology, and quickly bonded over our mutual love of horror movies and all things creepy. He was always the kind of guy who loved a good scare. He lived for ghost stories and urban legends. But none of that prepared him for what happened. It was early June when Alex first told me about the dream. We were grabbing drinks at our favorite bar, and I could tell something was off with him right away. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his skin had a pale, sickly tint to it. I figured he was just stressed from work. He'd been working as a therapist for a few years, and it wasn't exactly a low-stress job. But when I asked him about it, he shook his head. "It's not work, man," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's this dream I've been having. It's weird." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of dream?" He hesitated for a moment, as if he wasn't sure whether to tell me. But then he sighed and took a long sip of his drink. "It started a couple of nights ago. I wake up in the middle of the night, and there's this woman standing at the end of my bed. She doesn't say anything. She just watches me." I leaned in. My curiosity piqued. "What does she look like?" Alex rubbed his eyes, clearly uncomfortable. I don't know. She's got long black hair, really pale skin, and she's wearing this old-fashioned dress, like something from the 1800s or something. But it's her face that freaks me out. It's blank, like no expression at all. She just stares. A chill ran down my spine as he described it, but I tried to laugh it off. "It's just a dream, man. Everyone has nightmares." He shook his head again, more vigorously this time. "No, this is different. It feels real, like she's actually there. And the worst part is, I can't move. I'm completely paralyzed, just lying there, staring at her, and she's staring back. Then, after what feels like hours, I wake up." Over the next few days, Alex's situation got worse. He started texting me late at night, saying he couldn't sleep. The dream was happening every single night, and each time, it was the same. He'd wake up to find the woman standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with that cold, expressionless face. "She's getting closer." He texted one night around 3 a.m. "Last night, she was standing right next to me." I didn't know what to say. I tried to be supportive, telling him it was probably sleep paralysis, something we'd studied back in school. I sent him articles about how sleep paralysis could cause vivid hallucinations and how stress could make it worse. But Alex insisted it wasn't just that. He was convinced the woman in his dreams wasn't a hallucination. She was something else. Something real. After about a week, Alex stopped sleeping altogether. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd feel her presence, and the terror would snap him wide awake again. He told me he was afraid to sleep, terrified of what would happen if he let his guard down for even a second. "It's like she's waiting for me to fall asleep," he said one night over the phone. His voice was shaky, and I could hear the exhaustion in his words. "She wants something from me, but I don't know what." I didn't know what to do. I kept telling him to see a doctor, to get some help, but he was too scared. He didn't think a doctor could fix what was happening to him. He wasn't sure anyone could. By the time Alex hit day 5 without sleep, he was a wreck. His messages became more erratic, more paranoid. He started sending me voice notes in the middle of the night, rambling about how he could hear things, footsteps outside his window, soft whispers that seemed to echo in his ears even when he was alone. "I'm going crazy. Man," one of the messages said, "I can hear her. She's not just in the dreams anymore. I can hear her when I'm awake. I tried to convince him to take a break from work, to come stay with me for a while, but he wouldn't. He said he couldn't leave his apartment, that he felt like something was keeping him there. I didn't press him on it. I didn't want to make things worse, but I knew I had to do something. Finally, after a full week of no sleep, I convinced Alex to see a therapist. He was reluctant at first, but after some pleading, he agreed. I went with him to the appointment, hoping that maybe a professional could help him see that this was all in his head. The therapist we saw was a kind, middle-aged woman named Dr. Harper. She listened patiently as Alex described the dreams, the insomnia, and the growing sense of dread that was consuming him. She asked all the right questions about his work, his family, his stress levels. But when Alex got to the part about the woman in his dreams, Dr. Harper's face darkened just slightly. Sleep paralysis is a well-documented phenomenon, she said, jotting something down in her notebook. It's common for people to see figures during these episodes, especially when they're under a lot of stress. It's likely that your lack of sleep is amplifying the fear you're experiencing. Alex didn't look convinced. It's not just the dreams. She's following me. I can feel her. Dr. Harper looked at him sympathetically. Your mind is exhausted. Alex, it's not uncommon for people who are sleep-deprived to experience hallucinations while they're awake. Your brain is trying to process the lack of rest, and it's creating these images to make sense of the fear you're feeling. Alex nodded, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. He didn't believe her, and honestly, part of me wasn't sure I did either. The way he talked about the woman in his dreams, about how real she felt, was starting to get to me too. Dr. Harper prescribed some medication to help Alex sleep and suggested that he start keeping a dream journal to track his experiences. It was a good start, but it didn't help. The meds didn't work. Alex was still awake, still tormented by the woman. If anything, things were getting worse. He told me the dreams had become more vivid, more terrifying. He wasn't just seeing the woman anymore. He was starting to hear her voice, whispering in his ear, though he couldn't make out what she was saying. She's angry, he said one night over the phone. I don't know why, but I can feel it. She wants something from me. I was at a loss. It had been 8 days since Alex had slept, and I didn't know how he was even functioning. He sounded delirious, half crazed, like someone who was teetering on the edge of reality. I told him I was coming over, but he begged me not to. I don't want you to see me like this, he said. I don't want her to see you. That last sentence sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what to do, so I hung up and hoped that he'd at least try to sleep that night. He didn't. On the morning of the 9th day, I got a text from Alex. Please help me. She's here. My heart dropped. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to his apartment. The whole drive there, my mind was racing. What if I was too late? What if something had happened to him? When I got to his building, I ran up the stairs and banged on his door. There was no answer. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried the door, it was unlocked. I stepped inside, calling out his name, but there was no response. The apartment was eerily quiet, and as I walked through the living room, I noticed something strange. The place was a mess, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, but it wasn't just disorganized. It looked like someone had been searching for something. I checked the bedroom next, and that's when I saw it. On the wall above Alex's bed were deep scratches, as if someone or something had clawed at the paint. The sheets were rumpled, and the pillows were tossed on the floor, but Alex wasn't there. I searched the entire apartment, but he was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished without a trace. Panicked, I called the police. They arrived within the hour and started searching the area, but they didn't find anything either. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. It was like Alex had simply walked out of his apartment and disappeared. But I knew that wasn't the case. The police treated it like a missing persons case. They questioned me, Alex's family, and his co-workers, but no one knew where he could have gone. They checked his bank accounts, his phone records, even his emails, but nothing was out of the ordinary. It was as if Alex had just vanished into thin air. They asked me if Alex had been acting strangely, and I told them about the dreams, about how he hadn't slept in days. I even told them about the woman, the one he kept seeing in his nightmares. But they didn't take it seriously. Why would they? It sounded like the ravings of a sleep-deprived mind. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Alex. The police eventually scaled back their investigation, treating it as a cold case, but I couldn't let it go. I knew there was more to this than they realized. I knew that whatever had been haunting Alex hadn't stopped with his disappearance. In the weeks that followed, I started having nightmares too. At first, I thought it was just stress. I'd been losing sleep, obsessing over Alex's disappearance, trying to piece together what had happened to him. It made sense that I'd start having nightmares too. But these weren't just any nightmares. They were his nightmares. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, and see her, the woman Alex had described, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me, just like in his dreams. She didn't say anything. She just stared with that blank, expressionless face. And just like Alex, I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, trapped in my own body as she stood there, looming over me. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that it was a combination of sleep paralysis and stress. But every night, the dreams grew worse. She was getting closer, just like she had with Alex. Each night, I'd wake up, and she'd be standing a little closer to my bed, her cold, empty eyes locked on mine. I tried everything to stop the dreams, sleeping pills, meditation, even staying awake for as long as I could. But it didn't matter. No matter what I did, she was always there, waiting for me when I closed my eyes. And that's when I realized it. Whatever had taken Alex was coming for me next. One night, about a month after Alex disappeared, I was sitting in my living room, trying to stay awake, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a text message from Alex's number. The message was short. Just 2 words, "She's here." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It couldn't be him. The police had traced his phone and confirmed that it hadn't been used since the day he vanished. But there it was, his number, sending me a message. I replied, my hands shaking as I typed, "Where are you?" No response. I called the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again, but it was the same. I didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or had Alex somehow found a way to contact me from wherever he was? The next day, I went to the police with the message, but they didn't take it seriously. They said it was probably a glitch, or worse, someone trying to mess with me. But I knew better. She had taken him, and now she was coming for me. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with finding out what had happened to Alex. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything else. All I could focus on was the woman in the dreams, the one who had haunted him, and who was now haunting me. I started digging into the history of sleep paralysis, researching ancient myths and folklore about entities that would visit people in their sleep. There were countless stories from different cultures about shadowy figures, demons, and spirits that would prey on people as they slept. But none of it gave me any answers. None of it told me how to stop her. The dreams continued, growing worse with each passing night. I'd wake up gasping for breath, my body drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Every time, she was there, standing closer and closer to me, her cold, empty eyes fixed on mine. I knew that if I didn't do something, I'd end up just like Alex. I'd disappear, lost to whatever dark force had taken him. But I didn't know how to stop it. After that night, I couldn't just sit back and let this consume me. I had to find some way to fight it. Something told me that whatever was haunting Alex wasn't finished with me yet. The nightmares had become too real, too personal. I needed answers. I started digging deeper into sleep paralysis, folklore, and the dark corners of the internet that talked about hauntings, paranormal entities, and unexplained disappearances. I needed to understand what was happening, what had taken Alex, and how I could avoid the same fate. That's when I found a post on an obscure forum dedicated to paranormal phenomena. It was from a user claiming to have experienced something eerily similar to what Alex and I had gone through. The post was old, nearly a decade, but the details were chillingly familiar. The user described seeing a woman in their dreams, always standing at the foot of their bed, staring silently, just like the woman in Alex's nightmares. The user also mentioned that they had been unable to sleep, plagued by the same insomnia that had taken hold of Alex. They even described the whispers and the cold feeling that followed them everywhere, both in their dreams and while awake. But there was one key difference in the story. The user claimed to have found a way to stop the woman before things escalated further. According to them, the woman was something called a mare, an ancient spirit said to sit on people's chests while they slept, causing nightmares and, in extreme cases, death. In Scandinavian folklore, the mare was believed to be the cause of sleep paralysis, haunting its victims until they were too weak to fight back. The entity would prey on those who were emotionally vulnerable or going through some kind of trauma, feeding off their fear and eventually taking their lives. The user had discovered a ritual that was supposed to ward off the mare, a way to sever its connection to the physical world. It involved a series of steps that sounded more like superstition than anything else. But at this point, I was desperate enough to try anything. I spent the next few days gathering everything I needed for the ritual. The instructions were vague, but the user had been very specific about the materials required. I had to find candles, incense, salt, and a few other odds and ends that felt like something out of a witch's toolkit. I even had to get a mirror, which, according to the post, would trap the mare's reflection during the ritual. It took me a while to get everything together, but by the time I was ready, I was more determined than ever to stop this. I knew that the woman would come for me again. It was only a matter of time, and I needed to be prepared. The night I decided to perform the ritual, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, like I was finally taking control of something that had been spiraling out of control for too long. I set up the candles in my bedroom, arranged the mirror on the floor in front of my bed, and sprinkled a circle of salt around the room. I wasn't sure if I was doing it right, but I followed the instructions to the letter. Once everything was in place, I lit the candles, started the incense, and waited. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft crackle of the burning candles. I sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes locked on the mirror, waiting for something, anything to happen. For a long time, there was nothing, just silence and the flicker of candlelight. But then, as the incense filled the room with its smoky scent, I felt it, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. My heart started to race, and I knew she was coming. The candles flickered violently, and I could hear a faint whispering sound, like someone speaking just out of earshot. My skin prickled with goosebumps as I watched the mirror. My breath caught in my throat, and then I saw her. She appeared in the reflection of the mirror, standing behind me at the foot of the bed. Her long black hair hung over her face, her pale skin almost glowing in the dim light. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, watching me. I felt frozen, the same sense of paralysis that had gripped me in my dreams taking hold of me now. But this time, I was awake. This time, I wasn't dreaming. "Leave me alone," I whispered, my voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. She just stood there. Her eyes locked on mine through the reflection. The whispering grew louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I grabbed the piece of paper with the ritual's final words and spoke them aloud, my voice shaky but determined. The instructions were clear. Speak the words, shatter the mirror, and sever the connection. With a trembling hand, I picked up the small hammer I had brought for the ritual and struck the mirror. It shattered with a loud crack, pieces of glass scattering across the floor. The whispering stopped abruptly, and the air in the room seemed to shift, growing lighter, less oppressive. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman was gone. The room was silent, save for the faint crackle of the candles. Had it worked? The days that followed were strange. I didn't see the woman again, and the nightmares stopped. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept through the night. The sense of dread that had hung over me like a dark cloud seemed to dissipate, and I started to feel like myself again. But something still didn't sit right with me. As much as I wanted to believe the ritual had worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. I hadn't found Alex, and there were still too many unanswered questions. Where had he gone? And why had this happened to us? I spent the next few weeks trying to move on, but I couldn't let it go. I kept searching for answers, kept digging into the folklore and the strange occurrences surrounding Alex's disappearance. I talked to more people online, reached out to paranormal experts, and even tried to contact the original poster who had shared the ritual. But no matter how hard I searched, I couldn't find anything concrete. Then, one night, something happened that made me realize the nightmare wasn't over. I was sitting in my living room, flipping through an old notebook I had used during my research, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a knock, soft, but deliberate, like someone tapping on the wall behind me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then it happened again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I turned around, my heart racing, and stared at the wall. There was nothing there, just the empty space of my apartment. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. I stood up, my hands shaking, and walked toward the wall. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I stood there in silence, my ears straining for any sound. But the room was deathly quiet. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. It had to be in my head. I was probably just stressed, or maybe it was a noise from the apartment next door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew better. The mayor wasn't finished with me yet. After that night, the knocking became a regular occurrence. It would happen at random times, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in broad daylight, but it was always the same. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, sometimes on the wall, sometimes on the door, but always there, always waiting. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the stress of everything was making me paranoid. But as the days went on, the knocking grew louder, more persistent. It followed me everywhere, no matter where I went. I could hear it, just faintly in the background. I even started hearing it in my sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of knocking, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I'd think I could see her, the woman from the dreams, standing in the shadows, watching me with those cold, empty eyes. I couldn't escape her. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, she was always there, lurking just out of sight. I realized then that the ritual hadn't worked, not completely. I had managed to sever the connection, but the mayor was still there, still waiting for the right moment to strike. As the days turned into weeks, I felt myself slipping deeper into paranoia. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls from friends and family. I couldn't focus on anything except the knocking and the fear that she was coming for me. I was spiraling, and I knew it. The dreams returned, more vivid than ever. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the sound of the knocks echoing in my head, my mind racing with thoughts of Alex and the woman. I knew I had to find a way to stop her, but I didn't know how. One night, after another sleepless week, I woke up to the sound of knocking, but this time, it wasn't on the wall or the door. It was coming from inside my closet. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was waiting for me on the other side. I knew that if I opened the door, she would be there, watching me with those cold, lifeless eyes. But I had to know. I got out of bed, my hands shaking, and slowly walked toward the closet. The knocking continued, steady and relentless, echoing in the small room. With trembling hands, I reached for the doorknob and pulled it open. The closet was empty, but as I stood there, staring into the darkness, I felt it, her presence. She was there, just beyond the veil of reality, watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. I slammed the door shut and stumbled back to my bed, my heart racing. I knew then that I was trapped. There was no escaping her. She had taken Alex, and now she was coming for me. I didn't know how much longer I could last. I was running on empty, both mentally and physically. The constant fear, the lack of sleep, the never-ending paranoia, it was all too much. I knew I was losing myself, just like Alex had before he disappeared, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I reached out to one final expert, a man I'd found through one of the online paranormal forums. He claimed to be an occultist, someone who specialized in dealing with entities like the mayor. I was skeptical. Of course, how could I not be? But I was desperate, and I had no other options. We arranged to meet at my apartment. When he arrived, he was a tall, thin man with a sharp, angular face and piercing blue eyes. He carried a small, leather-bound book and a bag filled with strange, arcane items, candles, herbs, crystals, and other objects I didn't recognize. He didn't waste any time. As soon as he stepped into my apartment, he set to work, lighting candles, placing crystals around the room, and muttering incantations in a language I didn't understand. "This mayor," he said, his voice low and serious, "is a powerful entity. It feeds on fear, on sleep deprivation, and on the vulnerability of the mind. You're lucky it hasn't taken you yet." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. "Can you stop it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he finished arranging the items in the room and turned to face me. "I can try," he said finally, "but you need to understand something. Once the mayor has its sights set on you, it's nearly impossible to escape. I can banish it temporarily, but if it wants you, it will find a way back." I nodded, my throat dry. "Do whatever you have to." The ritual was intense. The man, the occultist, began chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. The room filled with the heavy scent of burning herbs, and the air seemed to grow thicker, almost oppressive. The candles flickered wildly, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. As he worked, I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. It was subtle at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The temperature dropped, and I could feel the presence of the mayor. She was here, watching, lurking just beyond the edges of the room. The occultist's chanting grew louder, more forceful. He raised his hands, and the crystals he'd placed around the room began to glow faintly. I could feel a pressure building in the air, like a storm was about to break. And then, all at once, the room erupted into chaos. The candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness. The mayor's presence was overwhelming now. I could feel her all around me, suffocating, her cold, lifeless gaze boring into me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The occultist's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and commanding. He shouted the final words of the ritual, and in an instant, everything went still. The mayor was gone. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The occultist knelt beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. "For now." In the weeks that followed, I slowly began to recover. The nightmares stopped, and the knocking disappeared. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I slept through the night, without fear, without the constant dread of the mayor looming over me. But I knew the truth. The occultist had been right. She wasn't gone for good. She had been banished. But she wasn't destroyed. She was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I tried to move on with my life. To put everything behind me, I threw myself into work, reconnected with friends and family, and tried to find some semblance of normalcy. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, a fleeting figure, standing at the edge of my vision. And in those moments, I knew she was still watching. It's been years since Alex disappeared, and I still don't have any real answers. The mayor took him. That much I know. But why? And where did he go? I may never find out. All I know is that I survived. I managed to escape the mayor's grasp, at least for now. But I'm always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for the day she comes back for me. So if you're reading this, and you've ever had a dream like Alex's, if you've ever seen her standing at the foot of your bed, watching you, be careful. She's out there, and she's always looking for her next victim.